Good morning. Happy snow day, guys. Are there kids lurking about for you too with all the weather going on in State College? It is snowing hard outside my window, but I live a little bit outside of town, so I don't know. It can be like 2 miles and it's raining somewhere else. So good morning to a snowy BWI Live Show. We're talking about 2024 and look ahead at the Penn State roster, how things might shake out for the spring. Gentlemen, good morning, and how has your morning been so far, Fitz? What's the state of your house today?
Oh, it's terrific. I feel like the kids in Jurassic Park when the raptors are like stalking them. Like I'm waiting for dogs, kids, wife, whatever, just to take over and to at some point just like burst in the door. So it's great. It's great. I mean, we got the call this morning, and knew the weather was going to be bad. I didn't know it was going to be cancel school at 5 o'clock bad, but they were right. I mean, shout out to the State College Area School District, and they did the right thing because it's pretty nasty out here.
Nate, I like to start off with, something that you guys have written or, conversation topic, but just kind of ease us into the conversation. But there's too many things with you, Nate. We could talk about the national championship from yesterday. We could talk about basketball, upset win, the Palestra. Where do you want to start? What do you want to start with the show today?
Wow. Let's do basketball because then we can quickly move on from it. It was a good weekend for Penn State basketball in Philadelphia, against a Michigan team that is not great, but certainly coming off of the Michigan State loss last week for Penn State, where they just got absolutely demolished, to come back and look really not very good in the first half, but then play well, get the crowd into it, kind of another, feather in the cap for this series of Palestra games, right? They've had 4 now and they've won 3 of them, right? It's just, it's something that obviously fits, obviously works, is good for Penn State basketball and something that they're going to keep trying to do.
It seems to be their style. Their big win so far, they've been down and then they come back at halftime. So just they're an interesting team this year. And we knew that coming in. We're going to have a hoop show later this week, right?
We are.
Right.
So we'll save that conversation for there so that we can include young Fitz in this chat because he does not watch Nittany Lion basketball.
If Fitz, you're muted there.
That's not true. I told you the other day that I was watching the game, and Michigan, not good. Penn State, nice resiliency. It was good to see. I really enjoy watching Kanye Clary. I think he's a really good player, just in the little things that he does. And I know that Penn State fans hold him in high regard. I think he's a heck of a player. Like his ability to dribble out of pressure the other day, like won them the game, in my opinion. So it's fun to watch. And I want to go to the Palestra next year, like with you, like that. I don't want to cover the game.
No, work.
No, I was talking to Brian Doan the other day, and he's like, "Have you ever seen a game there?" And I was like, "No." He's like, "You got to. It's so awesome." So
it's cool.
As a basketball guy myself, I know I don't talk basketball, but I think next year maybe is the year, Nate.
Let's do it.
Okay,
come with me.
All right, setting future plans, but we got to look back for 1 minute. For a little bit, maybe more than 1 minute, talking about the college football national championship last night. Michigan wins. They kind of have a game like they always do, which is it's close, and then lopsided final score. So they are the college football champion. First off, just want to get your guys' thoughts on the game last night. We don't have to do a full breakdown of the game, but just, Fitz, what did you think about Michigan in Washington last night?
Well, what every Penn State fan wants when they log into their Penn State YouTube show is to talk about Michigan winning a national championship. I mean, well deserved. They outplayed, outmuscled, just outdid everything to Washington. It's a heck of a staff out there. They've built the team the way that they want to play, and they've forced teams to change their outlook because of it. And I think it's a feather cap. And hey, who knows if the championship is going to stand 10 years from now? But like they went out there, they did it. They did a heck of a job.
Fitz, Nate. What do you think?
They forced teams to change their signals too, Fitz. So
yes, they did.
I loved how casual and look, like the broadcast, and we're in the same spot, right? You're not in a winning position to talk about the obvious because this is a team that is good with or without that underlying cloud, right? It doesn't change the fact that this is a team that won a bunch of games. Absolutely. However, right? When Chris Fowler at the end is just kind of the one shining moment after the game, and it's like, the dealt with some controversy, some of it self-inflicted, like.
Let's just put it in small caps as much as possible. Just understate it as much as possible.
Michigan won 15 games this season, of which Jim Harbaugh coached 9. Right? Like, it's just a program that, if you're acknowledging reality, was engulfed in off the field distraction this year, and not just distraction, but integrity of the game distraction. Right?
Yeah.
Like stuff that makes you call into question some of the outcomes. And so, they won the game. I did think, again, being honest here, that there was some officiating that was certainly questionable in the second half of that game that, doesn't necessarily change the outcome, but certainly changes the margin of victory, the way that it ended up playing out in the last, whatever it was, 8 minutes of the fourth quarter. That may have been different, but Michigan did it. They finally got where they wanted to go. How they got there,
I mean, it is a part of the conversation for sure. Part of the conversation, David Amble in the chat says, time for a wrestling show. Well, David, actually, this is something that we talked about this morning, and we are going to do a segment on wrestling at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com this week. So featured content over at the site. So if you want to check that out, be looking for it in Greg Pickle, his content later in the week on wrestling. We're going to have a breakdown and a conversation about wrestling starting the Big Ten duels. So that's coming up over at the site. So we are going to be covering wrestling and basketball. And of course, this is a perfect transition into the conversation around Penn State and the national championship. Chris, here playing the hits. He says, we give Franklin a pass for the COVID year. Michigan went 2-4 in the COVID year and was able to turn around the program. Franklin has been out-coached, he says. Now, let's have a conversation about what I think is interesting in this, not just, anger at the situation. Guys, I think it's really interesting that Michigan played kind of the Ohio State model in the national championship. Explosive plays, quarterback, receivers, dominate with points when you can, but mostly be led by your offense and your quarterback, or the Michigan style, as you guys outlined, team, defense, running, de-emphasize the quarterback a little bit. And I just think it's interesting that we've seen Penn State 2016, 2017 be more like one of those programs, and there's been a bit of a shift, it seems, towards the other. So heading into 2024, and this is going to get into the meat of the conversation later about the roster and retention and all of those things, which one of those two kind of generalized blueprints do you think that this program is closer to emulating in their attempt to make the expanded college football playoff next year? Fitz, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's Michigan. I think the way that Penn State is going to have to build, they're not an appealing program for playmakers on the outside, even though that they've had some success there. Franklin has coached this the way that it's been coached in the past at Penn State, like defense first, and then, your offense is going to come along. It's not a new formula or anything like that, but I think that that's the way that a Penn State team needs to get it done. A Northern team needs to get it done, basically. I know Ohio State has the appeal to those receivers and things like that. Penn State just doesn't have that. So I think that's the way that you got to go. I think it's a product of where you're at. It's a product of what you've been, and stick to that identity and see what can happen. We've seen them try to open it up and it hasn't gone well at times. It was really fun to watch. Those you mentioned 16 and 17, but as a program identity, I think it's closer to Michigan than it is to Ohio State.
Nate, what do you think?
Michigan's defense, Washington's offense.
Is that that would be the ideal?
Do that.
Like, I don't think that. Look, JJ wasn't good until they started running him kind of late in the third quarter. That started to get them going a little bit. Wasn't great as a passer. They kind of stopped passing the ball. I think that we're not being genuine to not acknowledge that is part of Michigan's MO. Is they would prefer to play it safer if possible. And look, like there's strategic elements there. They want to keep the clock moving, right? You're winning the game. But Washington kind of figured them out in the third quarter. So yeah, I think that Penn State certainly would prefer to be more explosive offensively than what Michigan was last night outside of on the ground. I mean, it was not until the cascade in the final few minutes of that game. That was not a well-balanced Michigan offense. And I don't think that is something that Penn State is trying to emulate, bottom line.
Yeah. So Nate, do you think they can do it? Do you think that because it's interesting. We talk about passing attacks and we talk about, chasing explosive plays. Michigan's chasing explosive plays. They're just doing it very much in one area, on the ground. And, they want to get some explosive play action passes. They had one to Roman Wilson early in the game that set up one of the touchdowns, but generally they're not doing it the same way that we think of, kind of like we think of aggressive defense means blitzing. Well, there's different ways to be aggressive. There's different ways to chase explosive plays. Do you think Penn State can get there as the explosive team that has that level of balance or that level of passing explosion?
I mean, balance is the goal here. Like it's you asked me one or the other, and then Nate took the mesh point there. So good for you. But I mean, the balance is the key, and the explosion. Yes, you want to be like Ohio State. You want to be like the Washington, the Washington model and stuff like that. But I think it's harder to attain based on what you're able to recruit. So I think you go with that. So yeah, I mean, it's like I said, I think Franklin coached a very risk averse style this year because of who he had at quarterback and the lack of experience that he had at quarterback, ended up burning them. So I think that you try to get that in. And Nate makes a good point. Yes, Michigan does try to hit big plays too. It's not a situation of, it's not just the second half against Penn State where you're running the ball every play. Like they will try to open you up at the right time. It's a very pro outlook, and which is why Harbaugh's being floated for all these NFL jobs, because of that. That could I don't want to say seamlessly transition, but that's the style that would work in the pros. So I think that's really what you're looking for. You're looking for the balance with a sprinkle of explosion. And if you can get that, that's a perfect world. But obviously it's college football. It's not a perfect world.
I do find it interesting that, and maybe I'm not giving Jim Harbaugh enough credit for allowing these things in his ecosystem, but his coordinators, are very NFL style. What he did previously,
they're a great staff.
They're a great staff. What he did previously was not NFL style, and what he did in the, kind of some of the old school running things, they are a lot of new wrinkles and I don't know if advanced concepts is the right way, but like a lot of difficult challenges with the running game. So, I think if he takes that style to the NFL, that could work, but you do need some of those talents. This is a tangent we don't need to get into. Just generally, I don't know how he fits in the NFL if that's what happens next. One thing I do know is that if you want to fit on the football field, you need to be good at football. And we've talked about this quite a lot here. Lombard MMA. A great way to train your hands, train your mind, and give you the ability to translate your physical skills to the football field. The techniques and things you learn from your position coaches are all critical, but how do you just learn the ability to use your body correctly? MMAFx is a hand fighting technique and program, the only comprehensive hand fighting program video set for football players available. We've talked about it a lot here on the show, but Nate, this whole thing goes back to our partnership with Bruce Lombard, goes back to you taking me over to Lombard MMA in State College and getting to know what they do. And what we saw was actually the boxing program for the offensive line. Yep. What do you remember about that? Because I thought that was a super interesting place that we got to be for a little bit last year, about this time.
Yeah, I think it was a change of scenery for Penn State's offensive line, right? Look, do not need to go the whole way down this rabbit hole, but like January and February is not a lot of fun for Penn State football players, right? This is like the grind. This is like the bad days where it's not a whole lot of fun. And so to mesh in some of what Bruce is doing down there at Lombard MMA, I think had a lot of those guys excited and a lot of those guys, engaged with something that has its own purpose and is kind of cool to learn anyway, if you're into that sort of thing, but also translates. You can carry that over to the football field into something that, if bottom line, if Olu Fashanu believes in something and is invested in something, and it works for him, and he thinks that it's a worthwhile use of his time, whoop, maybe check that out.
Maybe check that out.
Maybe give it a listen. He's a pretty talented kid already, but one who is also brings intelligence to it, and wants to devote his time to the right things. So yeah, check him out.
Yeah, and it's something you can get more information at bruce@mmafx.net. That's his email, bruce@mmafx.net. But if you're interested in the video program, which we're going to show you a little bit here with former NFL player Anthony Zettel, former all Big Ten defensive lineman, this is what you can order, and you can get this teach tape professional videography, including different technical angles, slow motion, so that you can become Bruce for your team and teach them the right way to use their hands and the right way to use some of these techniques to win, especially defensive linemen, linebackers, receivers, anyone that has to beat press and beat blocking. This is a great way for you to learn your hands and how to use your body to manipulate blockers. All this, you can get the information, and as an awesome thing, because Bruce is an awesome guy, you can get 15% off MMA, lombardmma.com/shop. Use the promo code 15BWI. That's 15 BWI for 15% off at lombardmma.com/shop. So the main thrust of today is to look at Penn State and to look into the future. Classes have started. I don't know if they're going on today because of the snow, but we got an update about guys that are returning and some of the things that Fitz and I talked about last week on the show. Afterwards, Hakeem Beamon announced he's coming back for next year. So now that we've got our first snapshot of the players that are on the roster that are in town for January, what do you guys make of what's coming up in this spring semester, Fitz?
Yeah, I think you start at the defensive line. You mentioned Beamon and Ellies coming back. That's absolutely massive. Like when you set out to replace those guys in the portal, number one, you don't find much that is going to give you what you need. You don't find guys that what they bring to the table, like a Dvon, Ellies and a Hakeem Beamon. So getting those guys back in the fold is unbelievable. Really, like, I mean, defensive tackle was a big question mark coming into the year. I mean, how many times did we spent the entire offseason last year hand-wringing over it, and then we get to the season, hey, they're fine. So yeah, bringing back exactly what you had in 2023, I would say that's a good thing. So Deion Barnes is, he's got to feel good about this. He's going to get those two back, Keziah Izzard, Smith Vilbert, even as a complete wild card. I mean, you're going to take that because he's a guy that's been in the program. You think you know what he's bringing to the table there. So, sort of restocking that defensive line. You can't underestimate the loss that they're going to have with a decent chop. Like, it's going to be something that goes without saying this offseason that we're probably going to say a bunch anyway. But those guys are phenomenal. I think Denai is really good, and I think the guys behind him are pretty good too. And I mean, Vanover, Zariah Fisher, we're going to see a lot more of Jamil Lyons, but those guys, like, we suddenly go from, hey, defensive tackle is a complete liability, and these defensive ends are going to be great, to, hey, these defensive ends need to step up, but this defensive tackle group should be able to help bring them along. So I think that's number one. The great part about college football is it's such a cycle. It's not a situation where you're going to sign a guy to a 8-year contract or whatever like that. So it's but it's for a young position coach to not have to go out, to not have to find the portal, and you look at the defensive tackles in there. I mean, what's that get for you? Is it going to be more than Dvon Ellies brings? Is it going to be more than Beamon and Izzard and those guys bring to the table? So I think number one, you start there, and you're pretty far ahead of where you thought you would be, because after the season, just talking to guys in the program, I mean, they thought Beamon and Ellies were gone. Getting those guys back, absolutely massive. So it's just not upsetting the cart, and I think that is the biggest thing you take away from that is you build out there. You're gonna have an interesting spring for guys like Caleb Artis, Jordan Vandenberg, Alonzo Ford when he gets back. Those will be interesting, but feeling pretty good about the first four because they're the same four that you had this year.
Just based on the information, and Nate, you wrote about this over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. You did some reporting on this before everything came out, I believe. Just kind of feels like we're getting the band back together, like getting what you saw last year, plus the additions from this previous year. First off, am I on with that? Your face is giving me some. I don't know if you're right about that, but generally, like from a perspective of does this how do you view this update of what we get, this first tangible clue of what 2024 spring looks like?
Yeah, look, the conversation is NIL. It is convincing retention, right? That is what this is about. Is can you make a pitch as a program to borderline players? Okay, you're not going to win back first round guys, like Olu was such an aberration, such an anomaly that's different. Okay, so Chop's gone, Kalen King's gone. Okay, you can understand all those things. What about the guys that you would like to have back that are 5th, 6th, 7th round undrafted free agent types, right? How many of those guys? Because look, even last night, Michigan's roster was filled with guys who could have gone to the NFL last year and decided to stick around. And
is there a basketball equivalent to make here of veteran teams are ones that you look for deep runs?
Look, this sounds so stupid, and I get it, but 23-year-olds in college football have an implicit advantage over 19-year-olds opposing them, right? Yep. Like it's so straightforward. Having Hakeem Beamon, Dvon Ellies, Kazai Izzard, those dudes are men. They are men, and they will be lining up against teenagers in a lot of cases. That's a huge help. That just like your body, the ability to have that time, it changes things. And so for Penn State to have won some of those guys back is a huge win. That like undeniable. That is a boost for the program and something that very clearly Penn State has been able to make a pitch that resonates with some of these guys to continue their development. Are there some losses that you would have liked to have been able to make a compelling case to keep around? For sure, right? Caden Wallace would have been very nice for Penn State to have been able to make that pitch to. However, Sal Wormley is sticking around, right? So you miss one, you get one. But Sal Wormley coming back is a big thing for Penn State to have a multi-year starting presence back on the interior of that offensive line. So yeah, I don't look at it as a cascade, a tsunami of wins in terms of retention for 5th and 6th year guys. But I do look at it as, hey, you got a decent return. Tyler Warren coming back. That's big. You got a decent amount of those guys that can help your program because they are older and it's taking advantage. Like again, I cannot stress this enough. This COVID bonus year is such a unique, strange twisting of the rules that the programs that are able to take advantage of it and the transfer portal, right? All of these different NIL, all of these different pieces for this 5-year window of college football, the programs that can adapt to it and figure out what is the best way what's the most advantageous way to play these things, I think come out on top. And Penn State is kind of on the winning end and kind of not, right? Like they have not been able to exploit it to the level that I think some other programs have, but they've also they've been smart about it. They've been very intentional. And I think that you see that in some of these returns.
Yeah, because there is the balance of you want to have room on the roster to still recruit and to bring in fresh talent and to bring in guys that have, what's the cliche? Every year we're going out to find somebody to take your job unless you can stop it. Fitz, how do you feel like they've done kind of balancing all of these things that Nate's talking about?
I feel like they just played a team that is doing it like, I don't want to say optimally, but like on paper. Like Ole Miss is bringing back a lot of experienced guys. I know Judkins is going to Ohio State, but they're bringing back a ton of experienced guys and they're supplementing with the best guys in the portal. They can afford to do so. Like they're doing, I mean, that's happening for a reason that I don't think Penn State has that sort of advantage, but like, that's what they're doing. They're loading up on those old guys and they're bringing in the guys that fill the gaps in an effective way. Like younger players can be great in college. But you're only looking for your starting 22. If you get 5 or 6 of those guys, those younger guys to do it, the other 16 have to carry the load. And that's where these old players players come in, the maturity, the work ethic, and then it's going to set your program up for a couple of years because these, the kids that come in under them, if they don't transfer, are going to see what those guys have put in. So I think that is the approach as we get to the end of COVID, and you can take advantage of that loophole, whether it's a good thing or not. And that's the other thing, is we're talking best practices versus the practices that are in front of you. And it's kind of like, how we talk NIL. Nobody likes the system. Nobody thinks the system's good, but you have to make the most of the system. And I think that there are schools making the most of the system. Yeah, I put Penn State, if you're doing a graph here, above the 50 percentile, like one of the better programs, but also not one of the top programs. So that's kind of where I'm at with that.
Yeah, and it's also kind of the idea that nobody has the data. James Franklin, huge on data. Nobody has the data of what's the best practice of how to use the COVID year, because it's just been around for a couple years, so there's not a lot of evidence of, hey, do you want to do X, Y, or Z with it? Nate, you were about to say something?
Does anybody still think that Drew Aller starting right as a true freshman, Sean Clifford not returning, would have been good for Penn State football?
Yeah, I think based on the evidence, what you saw last year, it would be hard to still maintain that situation, unless you're saying like you don't want to win those games, and then that makes him better for 2023.
But would it have? To me, there's a very obvious benefit of having older. I think Fitz, you used the word maturity. Having that presence, having like, you have to be intentional as a program about the guys that you want to keep around. You can't keep malcontents necessarily. But if you have an opportunity to have an older presence in the room, guys who can command respect, who can set an example for your younger players, as much as you possibly can, you want that. I just think it's a no-brainer in so many of these situations to give precedence, to prioritize trying to keep those guys around as long as you can.
I think that there's also, and Fitz, you can correct me here, your perception of this, of the next thing is always the next best thing when it comes to recruiting and talent and 5 stars. But the fundamental principle is football is hard, like from a mental perspective, not just from a physical perspective. And there are certain guys that can get away with not knowing everything because they are so talented. But the rest of us, meaning the rest of humanity, don't have those skills in order to make up the knowledge gap. So older teams are better because they know what the hell they're supposed to be doing. Is that a fair assessment of kind of like where, Penn State needs to be based on the fact that they're not getting those guys that are unbelievably talented beyond like all of the Saquon Barkleys and Micah Parsons?
Yeah, and I thought you were going into an ad read there, so I kind of spaced, but it was no. It's a situation. I mean, you look at Caden Wallace. Okay, that makes sense on paper for him to come back and improve his stock or whatever, but it also doesn't, because he's been in school for going on 6 years. It's, State College is a place to be for 4.5 years, 5 years, some of us, and it does wear on you, especially when you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. Like, people like see these guys as, video game characters where you just place them in and, you keep them as long as you want until they're, until you're done with them. But it's hard. It's hard. Like, playing a college sport is hard at any level. And I know that these guys are treated well. Like, but it is part of balancing college, balancing life, like being 23 years old around 20-year-olds, 19-year-olds. Like, there's a difference there. Like, and that's really the tough part about it. And everybody it's a case-by-case situation when we talk recruiting. It's a case-by-case situation when you talk retention. Like, Daquan Hardy would have been fantastic to have next year. Like, then they wanted to have him next year, and he could have probably I think he can stick in the NFL. I don't know where he's going to land in the draft if he gets drafted, but like, he can stick in the NFL because he has a particular skill set. But it's a long time to be in State College, Pennsylvania, especially when you come from diverse backgrounds. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a folding in the fact that, you're trying to do something at a professional level when you're also a student is also a part of the conversation. Let's get to the meat or the heart of this conversation about the spring roster and maybe some of the things you want to fix from Penn State's offense last year. The receiver position, Keandre Lambert-Smith presumably is going to be here. But I know that there's some opinion about what this actually means. What this and Nate, you wrote about this, and you have some thoughts about this. So Penn State's receiver room, fixing that, making that, a couple veterans. If you've got Keandre Lambert-Smith, Julian Fleming, etc. I guess, how do you read this situation with Lambert-Smith?
Yeah, I read it as, don't make presumptions with him. Right? Just bottom line is, he is a guy who is tough to get a read on sometimes, I think. And so I think it's likely that he transfers out of Penn State. Obviously the transfer portal window to enter is closed currently. Does it mean he couldn't in the spring? No. Does it mean he couldn't in the next, what does it fit, 6 days?
Well, I mean, grad transfers can go in whenever too. Like Ibrahim Traore went in when we're on the air here. So like it's certainly possible.
Yeah, so there's just a lot, I think, to still play out. I think that look, taking any roster in college football as being in January as what it will be in August as the same is a mistake. Right. Just generally speaking, that's not how it works currently. And so with Keandre, it's just going to be interesting to see. It's going to be interesting to see what he ends up deciding to do. Certainly you can understand and make a pitch for either direction, right? For either side. For Keandre, was he featured and utilized to the fullest extent of his talents this season at Penn State? I don't know.
I think, and this is where yes, I think they did. Early in the season, he was a primary target on a lot of plays, and the offense had the issues that it had. The quarterback is a part of the conversation, so that you cannot separate the receiver getting open deep and not getting a touchdown from the quarterback and throwing that football. So there are things and perceptions and realities that are mixed. But generally, overall, he was the number one receiver, and then you saw at the end of the season how the rest of the coaching staff decided to emphasize the offense around tight ends and running backs. So, I mean, I think there was an opportunity there for him, and it played out the way that we saw.
And so that's the other argument, right? Is if you're Penn State, how much of this is, hey, have high belief in what his ceiling is, but just hasn't realized it over 4 years, right? Has had opportunities, has had chances that for one reason or another. I mean, I'm not putting blame on anyone solely, right? I think that there are shared responsibilities here, but at what point do you say to yourself, well, look, I'm hesitant to use this phrase, but I use it occasionally. It's like the devil you know versus the one that you don't, right? What is out there that you can bring in that you feel like is better, that is better, that what the influence is on the room, that know all of these outside factors the way that Keandre, because you've been with him for 4 years. Very clearly Penn State has shown a trust in him. James Franklin publicly has said multiple times, about some of the challenges that he has experienced in terms of his maturity and being able to deal with things, getting over setbacks, dealing with adversity in games, right? Staying in games. I don't think that there's anyone who can watch his play this season and say he's a guy who was always able to push through setbacks early in games.
Yeah.
He took himself out of games at times, right? But on the other side, there is, hey, if the dude that you see in practice that makes the plays that he makes against the defensive backs that Penn State has, if you're a coach, you're saying to yourself, man, like, if we could have that guy, like, oh man,
that's the issue, is that you've seen it, and like talent is the least of Keandre's worries. Like he is the most talented guy in that room, bar none. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows it. Is that what's going to get him to where he needs to be in the stat, or on the stat sheet every Saturday? No, it's not.
Yeah.
So that's where we're standing with him, is that if he can do it, like he can be a dude. Like he's going to go out. He's going to go, if he went to the combine this year, run a 4.38. He would run a 4-flat shuttle. He would, get in drills, and his change of direction is elite. Like that is the talent side of things. Like everything else is really what's been holding it. And he's 5 years in. Is that going to happen? I don't know. So,
Right.
but he certainly is capable of it. Like from a pure talent, like going back to the video game thing I said earlier, this is a guy that would have high attributes in everything that you would want to, like the speed attribute, the quickness attribute, like all that stuff to get where you want to be to, win a dynasty or whatever. And I can't wait for the NCAA game to come out if you can't tell.
That's what we're taking away from this show today, is that Fitz is super excited for the next NCAA game.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. But it's why Nate made me get the PS5. It's not for sale. But it's it's a situation where if all those things come together, it's great. But we can't sit here and tell you that it's going to.
Yeah, and that's the wild card too. Sorry, it's the wild card too of like you could have that. That's the idea of bringing in Fleming and having mature players in the room and, trying to find whatever chemistry it is to bring out the best in everybody through competition and all of those personality traits. But it's just feels like a wild card, as you guys have mentioned.
I think that there is a Kalen element to this as well of how do you perform against the best competition that you see, right? What was Keandre in the biggest games that Penn State had on the schedule this year, right? And the same can be said of Kalen. The difference between them is Kalen had last year to boost his reputation to the point where he had this built-in goodwill that I think is going to allow other teams to overlook the fact that he didn't have a great game against Marvin Harrison, right? Mm-hmm. That there were times where Kalen this year did not play up to the level that was expected of him against the best competition that he faced. Keandre doesn't have that. Keandre doesn't have that, right? He was injured for most of 2022.
Yep.
Was not able to make that same leap, build up that goodwill to where he was looking forward to this year as being his year to shine. And he, in a lot of ways, he was expected to be that top guy. But again, one reason or another, that's just not exactly what happened. And I also don't want to diminish the fact that he had 50 catches, right? It's not like the numbers weren't there completely.
And it's 4 dropbacks, by the way.
And 4 dropbacks.
Sorry, I didn't mean to totally derail your point. But I was looking up his stats.
Decision, Mike.
That was the rare comic relief from Thomas Frank Carr. But you look at his stats. He had 50 catches going in. He had 50 catches going to Michigan and finished with 54. Yeah, that's tough. That's a tough speed bump to get over, man. That is a tough one to get over in your head.
Yeah, and it is. It's the part of this conversation about the roster and how it's returning potentially that I think sets up all the way back to our conversation at the beginning of the show of how can Penn State win next year? What is their path forward to success? And, at this point, it's just anybody steps up in the receiver room. They need to have something like that happen. It doesn't have to necessarily be Keandre Lambert-Smith. I know he's the focus of here, but there has to be that competition. We talk about the number of players they brought in. There has to be the competition that actually elevates people into better play. And they have not had that from that room. Really, last year specifically, and we've been talking about it for 365 days at this point.
There is, to me, and I'm speaking broadly, if you're looking at this Penn State team and how it gets to the next step next year, it is not by featuring a bunch of new faces. That's not the path that they're taking. It is by developing the players that they have. Right. The guys that you're able to convince to return, the guys that are coming up, those second-year guys who are going to become third-year guys, that like you are asking for the coordinators and the players themselves to take those steps developmentally to be able to make that step as a program, because it's not coming in a magic elixir in terms of a rash of transfers in. But the guys that they did get, Julian Fleming being, I think, chief among them, or among the chief among them, as being extremely important to what they're able to do next season.
Yeah, and that kind of gives us our next conversation point. And Fitz and I have talked about this on our live show that we did on was it Saturday?
Sure.
And then of course, and then of course talking about the portal on our Thursday show last week. So there's been a lot of this stuff that we've reviewed. But Nate, I just want to give you the opportunity whenever we have a public forum to talk about all of the topics and the transfer portal. What do you think of their decisions so far in the transfer portal and who they've been able to bring in?
You don't care about my opinion. I don't, right. The stuff that I haven't seen enough Julian Fleming. I haven't paid close enough attention to his career to have a strong opinion. Some of the feedback that I've gotten is that he's struggled with injuries. I know one shoulder, two shoulders. Somebody can correct me on that, but I know he had some shoulder issues through his career at Ohio State. Never really threatened, it seems, being the top guy at Ohio State, but also Ohio State has had 4 of the best receivers to come out of college football over the last 3 years. Is that fair? So, what's the standard there? How do you judge that? Every single piece of feedback seems to be that he is an instant boost of credibility and maturity and work ethic and all of those things to the room, that bringing in and injecting somebody like that is going to be good for Penn State football. But does he fundamentally change the element of Penn State's passing game that was missing this year, which was passes over 4 yards? I don't know. Right. Some of the PFF numbers, whatever analytics you're looking at, are that the overwhelming number of his passes caught are 10 yards and in.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. This year, 3 of 8 on deep passes for 86 yards.
Can we talk about what Ben's talking about in the chat here with leadership?
Sure.
Because I'm sitting here going through it in my head, and it's a good one because they need actual leadership for the older groups, is what he says. We had Clifford Brisker, Cabinet, which I believe is Jason Kabinda, and others be stalwart leaders, need to grow up. Yeah, there we go. This was an issue this year. I think that we highlighted that at basically this time last year, because you lose a Sean Clifford, and I know, put the football aside, the Sean Clifford leadership element was big. No disrespect to Theo Johnson, who was a very good leader for Penn State. But if a tight end is one of your captains, that's probably a larger issue there. And like I said, Theo was great. Theo was the guy that sat him down and did everything like that. So you look at what's coming back, and I think that they get this year. A guy like Dvon Ellies coming back, absolutely huge. Kobe King is going to be a lead. I look down this roster on both sides of the ball, and I see more potential captains, probably twice as many potential captains as I did this time last year. Jalen Reed in the secondary. You're going to bring back on the offensive line. Wormley's going to come back on the offensive line. Nick Dawkins. Nick Dawkins was not a starter. He's probably the leader of that offensive line group. So him coming back is an underrated aspect of how they do things. Tyler Warren, probably a special teams captain. Riley Thompson, probably a special teams captain. Drew Aller's a year older. And maybe Julian, if Julian Fleming's the guy that Ohio State people said that he's been as a older type, leader type guy, you've got an opportunity there. So not that all these guys are going to be captains, but the outlook for the potential leadership of this team, I think is miles above what it was last year.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I do want to circle back to one thing about Julian Fleming and deep receptions, 5 for 217 in 2022. So again, even talking about Keandre Lambert-Smith, quarterback is a huge part of when a receiver gets the ball, if they get the ball on time and accurately when it's, those deep passes. So it's try to separate one thing, and there's 2 other things tethered to it to kind of muddy the conversation and not make it one specific thing that will work. Anyone want to talk?
I didn't mention Don DeLuca. The chat will come after me if I don't mention Don DeLuca.
Yes, absolutely. So last thing I've got is Paul Posluszny, College Football Hall of Fame. You guys have any good Paul Posluszny stories? I don't know if it's
I was working at Jimmy John's as an undergrad, and that's what I did before I did this. Was part-timer at Jimmy John's during undergrad, and he walks in, and I'm working with a big-time Penn State football fan, Chip O'Hara. I hope he's listening. But Paz walks up to the counter, and Chip is like just speechless. He can't talk to him. This was after the 05 season. So he was like, and he goes up and he orders his turkey on turkey or whatever he was eating because, you know, he had to make sure the neck kept growing. But like, it was so funny to watch. And Chip's like, I'm not taking your money. Like this, like Paul wanted to pay him. And Chip's like, I'm not taking your money. You just got us to the Orange Bowl. I'm not doing that. And it was really funny because Paul was just a sheepish, you know, he was still a kid at this point, but obviously he was a man, a Butkus winner, you know, just a guy that was so awesome to watch during my time as a student there. And it was just, it's so funny because he always seemed to be that guy. Like even when he was a pro playing on really bad teams, he was always a pro. So I am like ecstatic to see one of the guys, and I feel old with him going in the College Football Hall of Fame, but one of the guys that I watched as a student go in there was freaking awesome.
Sean Fitz inadvertently reports NCAA violation. Put up beach wine guy.
Yeah, they got better things to worry about. So.
Do they even have the ability to do anything anymore? Like, is there a statute of limitations on turkey? I hope so.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there is.
Yeah.
We'll go after Jimmy Jones for that.
Nate, you got anything? And by the way, when I asked the question, I wasn't quite sure in the timeline of your guys' professional careers where exactly this lined up, but I figured it was close to right on the line.
Yeah, he was right at the beginning of me covering the team, and was awesome. Just right, smart, funny, charismatic, all that stuff. The like the football ideal of like a tough dude who just played football really hard, had the iconic blood smeared photo.
Yeah.
So it was funny when I got into it. It was when his brother was coming through, and his brother was not close to him whatsoever. And he went to Notre Dame. He still went to Notre Dame, but he didn't really play much. And Penn State fans just irate that Penn State would not recruit the younger brother of Paul Posluszny, which is pretty funny in hindsight. But you know, it tracks.
So that's all I got for the show today. Guys, anything coming up or anything you want to get out of here? Some last words, Nate?
No, thanks for having me. Penn State plays basketball on Wednesday night. I'll be watching. I'm going to do a postmortem on, an autopsy of where Penn State stands as a program against the two teams that you saw in the national championship last night. So that's what's on my plate.
Of course, if you want to get anything over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, special offer 2 months for $1, code PSU1. Special offer only for our YouTube crowd and, of course, for our podcast crowd. Fitz, any last thoughts?
Transfer portal, Julian Fleming in, Nolan Rucci in, Jordan Meyer, Chase Meyer. Penn State's still expecting a couple more guys throughout the week. They have until the 14th for late drop, late add. LaJonte Wester, just committed to Colorado a couple minutes ago. That was expected. If you read our notes on BlueWhiteIllustrated.com yesterday, it was indicated he was probably not going to end up at Penn State, but still looking at corner. AJ Harris, of course. I know a couple guys have asked in the chat. He's in the student directory. Still, nothing's official till it's official, and I tell you that because it's just the way it goes. But still feeling the same way about AJ Harris. So the portal will continue. They're going to see. I don't really see this weekend being huge for visits, but if they find a guy that they want to bring in at the last minute, I think they can do that.
I appreciate that. I didn't know exactly how to bring up AJ Harris because, we're in this weird limbo. So I appreciate you giving an update on that for everybody in the chat because that was something everyone wanted to know today. Of course, we'll have all kinds of great stuff. We're coming up tomorrow talking about transfer portal, and we'll have recruiting on Thursday. All of that coming up this week on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Appreciate everyone being here. Nate Bauer, Sean Fitz, an excellent job here on a snowy Tuesday. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. We will talk to you later.